Well, to compare C to Python, well, if you were able, and this is the reason I'm doing this example is you will see the big difference between Python and C right now. In Python, you really write a single line of code. You just say def main and then print something, right? In C++, well, you do it in a more verbose way, okay? Because C gives you more interaction with more control over the hardware, but that means you need to do more work, right? So this program does exactly the same thing, which is printing principal programming. But to be able to do this, here I'm using print function, but I didn't tell Python where to find this function, right? In C, that's not the way. You cannot really call any function without defining it. And also the way C define functions, which is including this kind of syntax that I will explain in detail right now, is completely different than Python, which you just have two colons and you are done, right? You should open a bracket, close it, and everything in between is called the code block. But the important concept that I want to touch on related to the previous slide, using this function, which is printf, right? This printf is a function that is part of the C standard library. But to be able to use it, I have to tell my compiler where to find it. And this is the purpose of this include. So printf is defined inside this file, and this file is part of the C standard library. It exists in your machine, right? If you open any of your labs, you only have now lab 0. If you open it, you find that we split our code into a header file and a source file, correct? And this is only for organizing purposes. In the header file, I only expose the interface, while in the source code, I write my actual implementation, right? So here you only need to include your header file, which has the interface of this function, which means, well, printf is defined in that way. It doesn't return anything, but it takes any string and brings it to the screen, right? And these are open source stuff. So in fact, you can go to the studio page and see how it's implemented, right? And then return 0 because, well, main here returns integer, and I will explain this in a second. So some of the basics that we can learn from this program. Every C program should contain at least, and okay, to say it in a correct way, it's one and only one function that is called main, right? You don't have any C program that does not have any main, and you don't have any C program that has two main, right? It has to be only one main. And the reason for this is the compiler, when it compiles the code, it should start from the point of the main, right? So you can have hundreds or thousands of lines of code, but it's always that the program starts executing from the main starting point, right? This is why we should only have one main. So every C program contains a function that's called main. Program executes at the beginning of the main. The keyword int here, so if we want to explain this, this refers to integer, and this takes us to a topic that we will be covering next lecture, which is what are the data types in C. If you go to Python, well, in fact, you can say x equals 2, and then the next line you can say x equals hello, right? So x can really take multiple types on the fly. C is a strict language. I cannot really overload a variable with multiple types. You should define the type of the variable before you use it, right? And there are certain number of types that are predefined and you have to use them. We'll cover them in a detailed lecture later on. But here, writing int means this main function will be returning an integer, right? That's the return type. And so why at the end here we have return 0. Usually return 0 is a code in programming language that means you didn't encounter any error, right? Which means that the main executes correctly to the last line, right? And then this is the main of the function itself, which is main. And then these are the input parameters you pass to the function. So by the way, this is the correct syntax of any function, not just main. But main has the special name of main, right? Here I don't pass any input parameters, right? So it's just void, which means I don't expect anything. If you leave it empty, that's also possible, right? And then within the function, for example, within our main, I should open, well, the block of the function with an open bracket and close it with a closed bracket, right? This curly bracket. This is corresponding to in Python that you really have these two columns and then you have the tab to everything is aligned, right? But in C, it's a strip that you really have to open and close and everything in between belongs to the main, right? And if you have a bracket mismatch, the compiler will give you a syntax error. Good? Yeah, so as I was explaining right now, int main void is really the header of the main function. Int is the return type. Void is the input parameter. We don't pass anything, so it's void. And main is the name of the function. And then with regard to the printf, printf is something that is in the C standard library, as I said. It takes basically a string to print to the screen. Here it takes anything, text to print or welcome to 2SH or anything. And it has to deal with IO, the driver that deals with the screen. And to be able to do this, you have to include your header file that's called studio.h, right? Another kind of syntax in C is that every single statement has to finish with a semicolon. If you don't have this, the compiler will give you also a syntax error. Is there any question? Okay. So going back to our program, I can really split my program into multiple lines. I can use printf multiple times, and printf has a detailed syntax that we'll come into later on. But here, just to show you an example, a new line, which is, by the way, the same thing in Python or any regular expression language, /n means new line, which means I'm printing principles of programming in one line, and then in the second line, I print convention to sh4. And I can use printf as multiple times. If I want to add a comment, for example, here at the beginning, I have a comment called printing 2 lines of text. I can use these 2 backslashes, or if I want a multi-line comment, I can use the backslash within the asterisk. Good? So a lot of, I would say, kind of theoretical things. So let's open a compiler and let's try this together to see how things really look like. So here, okay, so what I'm opening right now is an online C compiler. You can use any other one, it doesn't really matter. This one is called Online GDB. The purpose of this one is simply being able to write C code and then compile it on the fly to see really what happens, right? So I will show you the simple program that we have been using so far, and then see if we play around with it a little bit, what happens. It is a bigger. So it already gives you a starting example, which is the low-world example. It has exactly the same syntax as we discussed, which, well, this first line, which is includes studio.h. Now we know what is this concept or what is this header file is doing. It's simply giving the implementation of the printf function. And without it, we'll have a problem, as I will tell you right now. And then I'm printing something. If we change this to, I don't know, welcome to sh4. And then I return 0. If we try to run this, so let's see what happens. Nothing happens, but I guess this is only because I'm zooming. If you see here, I run it again. So I get welcome to sh4, right? Then we have the example of really printing 2 lines. So I added a new line here, and then I have another line here that says, welcome to programming Warnick. And then run this. So you see that both are printed in 2 different lines. If I remove this one, well, we expect both will be printed on the same line, right? Well, this is all easy, it's no problem. But just to show you some of the things that I was discussing, assume that I forgot 1 semicolon, right? I told you that this is a syntax error, right? Which means the compiler will catch before even run the program. So if I do this and do run, at compiling stage, you already have an error that says expected semicolon, but you forgot it. Right? So it's a syntax error. Another thing that we will conclude with is, what if I really didn't include this header file? I just comment this line out. If I run this, well, it tells you that there's a problem right now. Implicit declaration of function called printf. What does it mean by implicit declaration? You're trying to use a function that you really didn't implement, which means you try to define it, right? So this is why it's a problem. And this kind of emphasizes that, in fact, the actual implementation of Printf is really within Studio page, right? So yeah, so we will stop here. It's just a very, very simple program. But tomorrow we will do more of these examples, hopefully by looking at our keys program. So thank you.